the Impactful channel of the Impact Revolution. So how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Yoshi. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for making the time for us. So if we start, because this is a short interview, 30 minutes, Greg, I would like to ask you for the first question, which is maybe a bit different, is how someone who really admires you and knows you very well, Greg, how
Hmm.
it will define you? How will
Hmm.
say who is Greg?
Yeah, very good. Well, I think people that know me well know that I'm
Yes.
passionate about sort of my core values of dignity and well-being and integrity. There's a big three values. They know that I am driven to cultivate dignity and well-being with integrity. And they know that I did it in a particular kind of way as an academic. Both my parents are professors, and I've grown up in the academic setting. And I've been
Yes.
on an intellectual quest, which started in, say, 1994, 19 to 1996, where I backed into what I would now call the problem of psychology,
All right.
which is the fact that intellectually, people don't know this, but our discipline of psychology is qualitatively different and more fragmented than biology, chemistry, or physics. And that's actually that's known, but people don't know that. I became fascinated with that, both in terms of what does it mean intellectually and what does it mean about things like psychotherapy, like what are we actually doing in psychotherapy? And if we can't say what psychology is in any agreement, why not?
Mhm.
And what are the implications of that intellectually? So my life quest
Yes.
really can be defined in relationship to cultivating an answer to the problem of psychology. And people then that know me know that I'm very passionate about that. I believe that actually the answer to that carries a lot of implications for wisdom. I believe it carries a lot of implications for our society and what I would say sort of is a meaning in mental health crisis. And we're at a very important time, and our knowledge is really chaotic and fragmented. And the problem of psychology is really at the corner of that. And so I'm an intellectual in pursuit of that, and I'm dedicated to that. And with the consequence being, if we can address this issue, the downstream consequences may be a way to address some of the meaning and mental health crises that we face.
Very good. Thank you. So now I understand your why and
That's
your
my why.
purpose. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's your why.
And that's a
Greg,
big
thank you
deal
so
to
much.
get to know me. I have an autobiographical narrative about my life, and that is one of the most important ways to get to know me. I could give you my trait profile and my psychopathology dynamics, but we'll just go with the why for right now. Huh?
Yes, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really interesting. And we're going to in more detail later on, but what have you find out so far about this search of these studies and this what you are looking for? Yes.
Yeah, well, one of the things I find out that I try to tell everybody about, and that is
Mhm.
I've already alluded to that, and that is everyone should know that there's a problem of psychology. You got anybody out there that knows like anything about physics should know
Yes.
there's like a problem of quantum gravity. You may have seen like Stephen Hawking and the theory of everything. Almost everybody sort of even knows in the culture, hey, there's a real problem with that.
Hmm.
For some
Uh-huh.
reason, people don't know that there's a problem with psychology, and it was pretty easy to state, and that is that physics is a science that says, hey, what's it about? It's about energy and matter across time and their changes. And what is chemistry about? Well, it's like chemical energy and moleculars. What's biology about? What's geology about? The scientists in those disciplines know what their field is about.
Hmm.
Psychology isn't that way. But people have this general sense of psychology is the science of behavior and mental process. Okay.
Okay.
But behavior is defined by the scientific method, meaning behavior is what you can see
Yes.
scientifically. And then you
Hmm.
infer what mental processes are, and there's no model for what mental processes are that anyone agrees upon. So it's just is what you and your school of thought believe in relationship to how you think about mental process, but there is no way to define what the mental processes are in the world that psychologists agree on. And actually, the entire field tried to do that, and then they gave up on it. And then
Mm.
they agreed that they would never find out what mental processes were, and they would only study it through the methods of science, but would never be able to tell you what mental processes actually are. And that's
All
really an
right.
interesting phenomenon in the sense that it's like, huh, really? We don't know what mental processes are? It's like, yeah, we don't. Not in the same way we know what living processes or material processes are. And that's kind of fascinating.
All right, so it's like there is a missing gap, if I understood well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Greg.
That's exactly
Uh,
right.
is the behavior and or what we see on the outside that is the gap with the mental or mental processes that are linked, let's say, with this behavior is not well defined. Yeah, is that something
Right.
like
Well,
that?
that it is certainly something like that in the sense that the way the field sort of conceptualize it is that you can see our behavior and we can
Yeah.
track that, and then it infers that there are mental processes underneath our behavior that are causing it. That's just the mainstream kind of view. But what they mean by mental process, okay, for example,
Yeah.
do they mean the neurocognitive computation of the brain? Do they mean
Hmm.
your felt experience of being, your subjective conscious experience? Do they mean your justification, like Rene Descartes defined the mind in terms of how you think about what's actually happening and the reasons you have for the behavior? Well, psychologists will mean many different things about what that is. There are
Yeah.
also behavioral psychologists who think the whole mental process thing's the wrong answer. And so, what you have in psychology is a bunch of schools of thought that then try to carve up the pie in a different way. The
Yeah.
unified theory solves the problem, so that's
Okay.
cool. It comes along and tells you what mental processes are with clarity and preciseness and gives you a framework for understanding them scientifically, which really hasn't been done before.
All right, very good. I guess this is a mixture of the different fields of psychology, like behavioral or evolutionary, social psychology, and maybe also linked with neuroscience and latest findings of other sciences that are helping or supporting also these theories. Is that correct?
Exactly. So the unified theory, what the
Hmm.
way I actually there's a couple of step processes. The first thing that I did was figure out the difference between human mental process, which is that rational justifying portion that then connects us and engages us what we're doing now, which by the
Hmm.
way you can actually see directly. You are seeing my propositional thoughts directly. There's
Hmm.
nothing, you say it to yourself. You can say a word privately and you say a word publicly. It's the exact same form. Okay.
Yes.
So the
Hmm.
idea that your mental processes of justification are hidden, well, they're hidden if you keep them to yourselves, but you can
Hmm.
also make them public very easily. You do that all
Yes,
the time. Okay. So there's
definitely.
one dimension of public justification that's available through observation. And that really is what it is that makes the human person so different from the rest of the animal kingdom is the dimension of justification, which ties together language and self-consciousness, the evolution of human culture, okay,
Uh-huh.
which grows out of primate behavior, which have their own set of mental processes, neurocognitive, experiential primate process.
Hmm.
So I figured out a way to first carve out the human mental process from the animal, and then I created a picture called the tree of knowledge system that shows actually how to place animal mental processes in the context of living process, and put living process in the kinds of material process, and put material process in the context of actually energy information. And really,
Uh-huh.
what that then gives is an energy information to matter, to life, to mind, to culture map of the evolution of complexification, what some people call big history. And it does that in a way that solves the problem of mental process, which shows that there's actually two different dimensions, the animal mental, like with us as primates, and
Hmm.
the culture person dimension, us as talking right now, like what we're doing.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you have to separate out those two kinds of mental processes. And actually, they're all behavioral processes. So that makes it complicated. And so I figured out a way to take behavior and brain and neurocomputation and self-conscious conscious experience and self-conscious justificatory process and tie them all together so that we'd actually be able to map the various domains of mental behavior coherently.
Very interesting, very interesting. That's really good. What would you say is your main lesson learned that you have found so far about connecting and linking all these different psychologies of different fields of psychologies, evolutionary, primitive, biology and neuroscience and all that that you have been
Yeah, I
linking?
mean, my basic experience as like I said on this intellectual journey is that actually this problem, okay, that this what is mind actually is absolutely central, and it grows out of the evolution of science itself, especially
Hmm.
physics, okay, in the Enlightenment, and it
Okay.
gives rise to what I call the Enlightenment Gap. So physicists started to track with science, the methods of science, they started to track matter in motion. And they built a knowledge system that allowed us to do unbelievably sophisticated things about how to understand material process. Okay.
Okay. Yes.
However, the way that knowledge system both the epistemology, meaning how it knows, and its ontology, at least as it was originally constructed, was such that the material sciences were structured in ways of very hard to place what we meant by mental in relation.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this really gives rise to what's called the mind body problem. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
you can go into the philosophy of mind. If you have any philosophers out there, they have to take graduate courses in the philosophy of mind because it's unbelievably convoluted, complicated set was what is consciousness and what's the hard problem and how does actual mental causation happen in a physical universe is an unbelievably convoluted philosophy of mind system
Uh-huh.
because the understanding from physics into biology and chemistry into biology was such that the system never figured out a way to actually coherently place the evolution of the animal mind and then the human justifying mind in a cultural context on top of the material and biological universes. And because of that, then it was all sorts of different problems. This is what I call the Enlightenment Gap, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically the idea that when the Enlightenment emerged, it gave us an enormous power. But what happened was it failed to solve the matter mind relation or mind body problem. It also didn't clarify what kind of knowledge scientific knowledge was relative to social and subjective knowledge. We get the modernist versus postmodern divide here. And then the ultimate consequence is a fundamental breakdown in our
Mm-hmm.
capacity for a coherent, conciliant scientific understanding of the world. And that's why we have the natural sciences, and then they blend into the social sciences and the humanities. And you go to the university and you're like, hey, how do we understand the world? It's like, well, who you asking? And
Mm.
everything is then fragmented in its particular silos. There's no grand picture of
Yeah.
conciliant, coherent knowledge that would actually put all the pieces in proper relation. The unified theory of knowledge says actually that's because of the Enlightenment Gap, and the epicenter of which is the science of psychology, science of mind, which makes sense. And if we solve the science of mind and we solve that in relationship to bridging the Enlightenment Gap, we'd actually be able to generate a coherent, conciliant theory of knowledge where we actually know how to connect matter to mind and scientific to social and subjective knowledge in a way that makes perfect sense.
All right. Okay. Very good. So interesting, eh? And about this enlightenment gap that you talk about, what is exactly the well the definition that will you say, and how can we get to close that gap? You know?
Well, the definition of it is so the gap just says philosophically, no one solved the mind body problem. Just go around and basically I look at philosophy of mind, look at psychology. So psychology doesn't agree on what its subject matter is. So there's one
Mm-hmm.
place. Go to philosophy of mind. It's a complete convoluted, chaotic set of understandings and just
Mm-hmm.
go around and ask what's the hard problem of consciousness. You'll see intellectuals have no real clue as to really, and there's no, I mean, people have part answers to that, but there's the entire field is a chaotic mess. There's no shared understanding. Utah comes along, from my vantage point, cleans that up very clearly. So that's a shift. And then the
Mm-hmm.
other issue is the difference between a modernist approach to science, which is like, oh, science yields our particular truth values that transcend social and subjective knowledge. We have the periodic table of the elements. Those are real true things rather than just believing that the earth is made up of, well, earth, wind, air, and fire, those kinds of cultural conceptions. Science is that's modernism. Postmodernism comes along and says, no, science is itself still a justification system. It actually brings power, white male colonial power structures. It creates all sorts of inequalities. It itself is a cultural narrative that's infused and embedded in a particular cultural structure, and it can't escape that. So the difference between a modernist approach is, oh, science and rationality can transcend culture. The postmodern says, no, you haven't reached escape velocity. There's a particular set of understandings that allow you to understand the way in which science can reveal particular kinds of truths about the universe and how it also is a human social construction. Both of those things are true. The unified theory tells you how both of those things are true and places them in proper relation also. So it solves the
Uh-huh.
science versus subjective social knowledge problem, and it solves the matter mind problem. Thus, you bridge the Enlightenment gap to create a unified theory of knowledge.
Okay. All right. I'm going to see if I can share the screen here.
Mhm.
To show this diagram that I really like, which is the tree of knowledge. Can you see it now?
I can see that. Yes, I'm quite
Yes.
familiar
All
with
right.
that diagram.
It's your tree of knowledge.
It's my
All
tree
right.
of knowledge.
So now, okay, great. So, could you discuss a bit what you have been saying now and discussing with this diagram,
Sure.
Greg?
Yes. So some of your audience may have heard of the term big history. Okay. Inside of science, there has always been people that are trying to create a picture of the big picture with coherence. Okay. Now, no big picture ever got really solidified in relationship to kind of really framing what it is that science tells us. There is a movement inside the academy, not a huge movement, but not a small one either. In fact, Bill Gates supports it, called big history. Big
Mhm.
history basically shows that all the big picture models about the universe, the way the universe works, is on a time by complexification axis, meaning on one axis, it goes from the Big Bang all the way back to the Big Bang. You can go back into energy, basically. And then from
Mhm.
energy, you get a complexification. Energy turns into particles, particles turn into atoms, atoms turn into molecules, they turn into cells, which turn into multicellular organisms, which then turn into human societies. And you get this line across time of growing complexification that is called big history. Okay. And that's
Okay.
a cool big picture view that I would encourage everybody to have. I would argue that science, if you want to understand the big picture view of humanity, you really have to put it on a cosmic evolutionary view in relationship to time by complexification. And you can look, there are many, many, many books, okay, out there. If you want to look for this understanding, there are many, many books and many, many people have articulated this basic outline. All right.
Okay.
Well, the
Very good.
tree of knowledge is itself a map of big history. And if you see carefully, closely there, one axis is the time axis. That's the one
Yes,
going past into the black dot, which is the Big Bang.
that's
And
right.
then you see a complexification axis, okay? But the difference in the complexification axis given by the tree of knowledge is that instead of a single cone of complexity that just says, here are the thresholds of complexity that we jump to, so from atoms into molecules, molecules into organisms, it gives rise to this four cone view. Okay, so we
Yes.
see that there are actually differences both of evolution of complexification like within matter. So for example, you go from particles to atoms to molecules and then across scale so that you get planets and stars and things like that. But then there's a different kind of jump when you get into life. That's why it's green. And that's why the vision logic is that it's a different kind of cone. So
Mm-hmm.
the unified theory says that not only are these layers of complexification important, but there are actually jumps into different dimensions of complexification or planes of existence, as I like to call them. Now, a
Plane of
plane of,
existences.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So a
Mm-hmm.
plane of existence is actually emerges when there's a novel information processing and communication network that then gives rise to complex adaptive dynamic behaviors that are mediated and moderated through this information processing communication network. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually the communication network that then gives rise to a medium that affords a novel kind of behavior, living behavior. So organisms operate on the life plane of existence in this language. And then what you get are minded animals, which emerge at the Cambrian explosion. So there's a time called the Cambrian explosion. This is basically where animals go from things like sponges and jellyfish into
Uh-huh.
complex active units that are preying on each other. And then the prey predation relation gives rise to complex active units with brains that move in relationship to us. And this is why birds and bees behave so unbelievably differently than trees and flowers. Okay. Okay,
Okay.
birds and bees.
Definitely.
And now the tree of knowledge says that actually we should call the bird bee behavior capital M mind. Okay, those are
Mm,
mental behaviors that you can observe as easily as seeing a tree grow. You can observe a bird fly around it. And it's the kind of behavior that makes birds and bees so different than trees and flowers that actually is the proper first definition of mind or mental. It's an adjective for the kind of behaviors that make them so different. Okay.
mhm,
And
mhm.
then when you think about the set of minded animal behaviors, it gives rise to the concept of mind as a third dimension of complexification. So
Uh,
now when I go for a walk in the woods, I see the trees and the flowers, and then I see the birds and the bees and the squirrels. And for me, I see that as mind, the
mhm.
mindedness, the sensory motor looping. Actually, Aristotle saw the world this way. We lost our ability to see the mindedness of animals as a particular kind of behavioral process, by and large, because psychology effed it up. and started to try to say, well, how do we measure this? Well, we measure it through behavior, and then we infer what's going on through neurocognitive process. And oh, okay. No, actually, what you want to do is you want to define the kind of behavior you're interested in. And the reason is because of brains and complex active bodies, yes, but you do not want to divide behavior with what you see scientifically and mental process, what you infer. That is not the right way to build what's called an ontology. An ontology is the map of the real. So this says actually just use the term mental behavior to capture the mindedness of animals with complex active bodies and brains. And then it also says that animals grow in their complexification. We get things like crabs and insects, and we get all the way up to mammals and primates. And then about 100,000 years ago, a whole new kind of information processing and communication system emerged, this language stuff that we do. And this gave rise to a dynamic of justification. So whereas animals are behavioral investors and living creatures metabolize for growth and reproduction, humans engage in a linguistic process to justify their investments in influence. They engage in propositional networks to build systems that tell us what is and ought to be. And human culture, at least the portion of culture that's linguistically mediated, is structurally and functionally organized into systems of justification, which actually is us as persons. You and I are persons, which means we've been socialized into a layer of justification where we self-reflect on our actions, unlike animals, and explain or give attributions, try to, why we do what we do as other people hold us accountable. And we build systems that of propositional networks that legitimize. We say, oh, the worldview of a culture. The worldview of a culture is its large-scale, macroscopic system of justification. So if you're born into India and I'm born into the United States, there will have lots of historical systems of justification that will inform at the macro level. And then there are meso level, depending on what your socioeconomic status is, and micro level, depending on what family you're in, will context of justification that you get born and socialized in. And as a person, you learn to navigate those. And that's the blue line. And so what this tells you is that you're an object at the gray level, you're an organism at the green level, you're a primate, animal primate at the red level, and you're a culture person at the blue level.
Very interesting. That's I think a great summary. Greg, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing if I know how to do that because the first time. There we go. Now we are back. Thank you so much, Greg. That was very interesting. So basically, what you were saying is that first we are matter, then later on we are biological, with this evolutionary psychology. I suppose that is included, and then we get to the psychological science, which is the mental part, and then now is the social and the culture that we have been living in tribes for many long years and time, and now the culture is the main driver, I will say. I don't know what's your opinion about the behavior that we are looking and we are seeing in the world.
Totally. Well, so culture has really two huge arms. One is this justification arm. So it evolves in terms of the beliefs and values, but it also gives us all sorts of cognitive flexibility and enables us to have a collective intelligence. What that has meant is we've been able to invent qualitatively different kinds of tools. Other animals use tools, but they don't really invent complicated tools. And we've had then an evolution of technology, which is not represented in that diagram. Technology is a hybrid between matter generally. There are some technologies that pull off life, but most of it's a matter-culture interface where there's a cultural set of ideas and needs that we then use to build particular things like desks, and whatnot. Well, as we built our language systems and our technologies, we changed the game. This is why actually we now call the Anthropocene the current time that we're living in, because humans became this, first they were super predators, and then they just jolted out of the general realm of evolution of animal behavior, because we basically, through our technology and through our cognitive justificatory capacities, we basically outstripped the capacities of other animals to evolve, because there's so much evolution that's happening now technologically and justificatorily, and that happens at a time scale that's completely different and logarithmically lower than evolution, meaning that 15 years in evolution of culture can be a big time. That's nothing in evolution of a human, because I mean, there's at the very least, biological evolution is intergenerational. So the unit of a biological evolution for human primates every 20 years. 20 years, what was culture doing now? So we're having an unbelievable speed of evolution. And by the way, we're actually about a cusp of an iterative interrelation between our technology and our culture. And this is because of the digital. Remember
Mm.
what I said about life, mind, and culture? Each one of those is a novel information processing communication network. Okay.
Yeah,
When in
it's
the
all about the
20
communication. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, when in the 20th century we built computers, the internet, and artificial intelligence programs, we were
Mm.
laying down the groundwork of like a nervous system that hadn't come together. Well, in the 20th century, this digital nervous system is wiring itself up and it's creating a medium for an entire another set of behaviors that we're now interfacing with. That's going to create a massive amount accelerating point of change and unbelievable difference in the way we act in the world that both is going
Oh,
to create all sorts of opportunities and huge numbers of problems.
yeah.
Anytime there's a complete difference, you actually have to thread the needle between order and chaos, and the amount of potential is going to make that needle threading very, very difficult. This is what we call the fifth joint point in UTALK, the Unified Theory of Knowledge, and we are facing it in the 21st century. And the question is, how are we actually going to understand the situation that we're in and wisely navigate the emergence of the digital and the fifth joint point in the 21st century? And actually, this is what you talk from sort of from an advertising perspective. It's like, actually, we really need this thing because to the extent that we're unwise, foolish, chaotic, and clueless in our knowledge systems, the ability for us to actually navigate through this is going to be a lot more difficult than if we were
It's going to be
actually
hard. Yeah.
sat in a coherent integrated pluralism that allowed us to actually understand the situation we were in and choose to consciously evolve accordingly. First thing I do as a psychotherapist is actually help the person become aware of the situation that they're in so they actually know what they're doing rather than
Yeah.
just keep banging around in the same sort of way. And we're basically flying blind right now in a very, very dangerous fog. And to the extent that you fly blind long in a dangerous fog that has lots of networked interdependencies, you can crash into something and the entire thing can come down.
Definitely, yeah, we are very. Technology is making us more unconscious behaviors, I think, and they are driving us instead of us driving with technology.
Exactly.
That
So if
and
you
that's
actually
the
have knowledge, you
problem.
can
Yeah,
pull exactly. So the relationship between conscious and unconscious processes, although there are some non-conscious process, you can't introspect and see your retina. But the relationship between awareness and unawareness is a complicated and dynamic one. And you talk is like, we better be consciously evolving rather than just unconsciously banging ourselves into the
yeah.
future, which is what we're currently doing.
Definitely. It reminds me to this book I read that was very interesting. It was Thank You for Being Late, the accelerated growth. I don't know. It was talking about the Moore's law or something like that.
Moore's
Is
law, of
that
course. Yep,
Moore's
yep,
law? Yeah, yeah, you
yep,
probably know
absolutely.
that. So
Yep.
it's the exponential growth of technology and the rhythm or the adaptation that the humans can capability have is just, we are there is
We
a gap. There is a
we
gap,
have
a big gap.
yes.
Until we become aware, as you say, I think it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult times until people become aware of this, this
That's right.
fact and this reality, so we can be more proactive instead of reactive. As we think
Precisely, and be more
that's it.
value reflective, be more clear about what we're doing. And my argument is that we're flying blind from, I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the Enlightenment Gap and the problem of psychology. So I am here as an intellectual to help with part of that and offer some solutions. I'm trying to sync up with other people that are seeing their issues. And if we can sync up a bunch of seers together in relation and network this and then get people metabolizing that and waking up to it, well, then maybe we might be able to sail through this fifth joint point. Okay.
All right, I think we share some missions and values and visions as
Amen,
well.
brother.
Great. So it was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time and explaining this tree of knowledge. It was
Mhm.
really interesting and it has a whole high level approach or systematic approach of about all the things that have to be considered, right? In order to understand
Exactly.
better the human behavior and the mindset and the unconscious mind and all that why we do what we do basically,
Totally.
yeah.
Exactly.
So just for the last questions, Greg, that I would like to tell you, ask you, Greg, is what is the last message will you leave to the world if you were to die tomorrow, for instance?
Yeah. Well, essentially, so we talked about the tree of knowledge. Behind me is a tree of life. I think that we can bridge, and that's a reference, of course. Both of those are reference to the Bible. I'm interested in anchoring our understanding to a naturalistic scientific view, but doing so in a way that revitalizes the human soul and spirit in the 21st century. And sort of to do that, UTalk is oriented to being that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity. I talked about those as sort of big three values that define me. Another way of saying that is cultivate wisdom energy. The garden behind me is a symbol of living with wisdom and cultivating and spreading wisdom energy. So that is my hope. My hope is that we can come together and be better at spreading wisdom energy or cultivating that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity.
I love that. Cultivate wisdom and energy. All right, and this is for startups and entrepreneurs. I will discuss to redefine the business mindset, which is kind of the culture, right? The world culture, finally. So, what message will you leave to them, which are the ones who can drive change?
Yes, well, I certainly think we are needing reflective people who can see both how change happens, but also see how change might evolve in a more productive way. I think we need to be very aware that the current capitalistic structure has created an enormous amount of potential, but actually a lot of risk. We have to think about what kinds of wise, value-based living would not only just promote our careers, but actually promote our embeddedness in the nested levels that we find ourselves in a way that's sustainable and oriented toward transcendent goodness.
Okay, great. So I think we could say reflective people or business people that can make the business sustainable in the long term.
Totally.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much, Greg. It was a pleasure, really, to get to know you and to get to know more about your mission and what you have found so far. And yeah, that will be it. Is there anything you would like to say, the last?
Nope, I appreciate the opportunity to come and share some of these reflections. And yeah, just go out there and cultivate wisdom energy.
Okay, cultivate wisdom and energy. Definitely great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Okay,
Cheers.
very good.